The Great Plains, an endless ocean of grass, sky, and wind. To those who lived there, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and other tribes, this was not just home, but a living, breathing entity filled with spirits, mysteries, and untamed forces. In what is the modern-day prairies of Canada and the United States, there was one presence that even the bravest warriors spoke of with caution and fear: the Teiheehan. This elusive group was a constant threat, one that few could fully explain, and yet everyone seemed to know about. The Teiheehan were not like rival tribes or the beasts that roamed the plains. They were something different, something older and more sinister. It was said that their attacks came like sudden thunderstorms, leaving devastation in their wake before disappearing as swiftly as they came. What little remained after their raids was enough to send chills through even the most hardened hearts. There were no patterns to their violence. Sometimes entire seasons would pass in peace, only for the Teiheehan to re-emerge when least expected. And when they did, the survivors of their onslaught would speak of swift-moving shadows, short but powerful figures, and a hunger that could not be satisfied. In many ways, they were as much myth as reality, lurking just beyond the edges of the known world, reminding the tribes that not everything in the land could be understood or controlled. Those who survived these encounters rarely spoke of them in detail, as if naming the Teiheehan too openly would invite further attacks. As a result, the terror they inspired became a communal silence, a shared understanding among the people that these little creatures were a danger, lurking in the very land they called home. This is the story of the Teiheehan, the cannibalistic dwarves from Native American folklore explained. The Teiheehan were more than just a terror of the plains. They were part of the ancient fabric of the land. Their origin stories varied from tribe to tribe, but all agreed that these beings were not of the natural world. Some said they were once a powerful tribe, mighty and proud, who angered the gods or spirits of the land with their greed and cruelty. Their punishment had been swift and brutal, cursed to become the very embodiment of their sins, twisted into savage creatures who fed on the flesh of their fellow humans. In this version of the story, the Teiheehan had once been warriors, feared for their strength and prowess in battle, but their arrogance had led them to slaughter needlessly, to raid neighboring tribes and take more than they needed. The gods, seeing their cruelty, transformed them into smaller, grotesque versions of themselves, stripping them of their humanity but leaving their hunger intact. They were forced to wander the plains, driven by a need to consume but never to find satisfaction. Other tribes believed the Teiheehan had never been human at all. In these tales, they were ancient spirits or demonic entities born from the earth itself. Long before humans roamed the plains, these beings existed, creatures of stone, bone, and shadow, sent by darker forces to maintain the wildness of the land. They were guardians, in a twisted sense, of the wilderness, ensuring that no one tribe or group could ever fully dominate the plains. In both versions of the tale, the Teiheehan's origins were tied to a cosmic sense of justice or balance. They were a consequence of living out of harmony with the world, whether as humans who had forsaken their path, or as ancient entities ensuring that humans did not forget their place in the natural order. This gave them a deep, almost spiritual weight in the minds of the tribes. More than just dangerous creatures, they were an ever-present reminder of the consequences of losing touch with the land and its spirits. Their connection to the spiritual realm, whether as cursed humans or primordial beings, made them unpredictable and dangerous in ways that no one could fully prepare for. Each story about their beginnings only reinforced the idea that they were more than just a physical threat. They were the embodiment of chaos and imbalance in the world. In this way, the Teiheehan became intertwined into life on the plains, not just as killers, but as symbols of something far deeper, representing a world that could not be fully understood or tamed. The Teiheehan were creatures whose physical form alone was enough to strike fear into anyone who encountered them. Although small in stature, typically no more than 3 or 4 feet tall, they were compact, muscular, and unnaturally strong. The physical build fits perfectly with their name, since Teiheehan comes from the word strong in the Arapaho language. Their size was misleading, as many who survived encounters with them would attest. What they lacked in height, they more than made up for in brute strength and savagery. Their bodies were described as stocky and durable, built for survival and combat, their muscles rippling beneath skin that was often likened to rough leather or even bark. One of the most unsettling features of the Teiheehan was their faces. Their sharp, jagged teeth were perfect for tearing flesh, and they were often described as having grotesque grins during attacks, giving the impression of creatures who took perverse pleasure in the destruction they caused. Their eyes, often described as glowing or reflecting light in the darkness, were cold and predatory, showing no sign of humanity or mercy. It was as if the very essence of their beings had been stripped away, leaving only a monstrous hunger behind. Despite their size, the Teiheehan possessed uncanny speed and agility. They could move silently across the plains, darting between rocks, trees, and tall grass without making a sound. This stealth made them incredibly dangerous, as they could approach their prey without being detected until it was too late. Their ambush tactics were a trademark of their hunting style, waiting patiently in the shadows before launching sudden, vicious attacks on unsuspecting victims. In addition to their speed and strength, the Teiheehan were skilled in using the natural world to their advantage. They crafted weapons from bones, stone, and other materials found in the plains, often wielding crude but effective blades and clubs. These tools, combined with their sheer physical strength, allowed them to overpower even well-armed and larger opponents. But more than their physical abilities, the Teiheehan were cunning. They were known to set traps, using their knowledge of the land to corner their prey or lure them into vulnerable positions. One of their most disturbing powers was their ability to mimic sounds. Whether it was the cry of an animal or even the voice of a human, they could create noises that would draw people toward them. Stories circulated of lost warriors following what they thought was the voice of a comrade, only to be led straight into a deadly ambush by the Teiheehan. This ability to deceive and lure made them even more dangerous, as they could manipulate not just the environment, but their victims' minds. Their appearance, powers, and skills combined to make the Teiheehan not just formidable fighters, but terrifying predators. They were more than capable of overcoming the strongest warriors through their brute force, cunning, and stealth, turning them into a nearly unstoppable force on the plains. Though the Teiheehan were fearsome, they were not invincible. Like any creature of the wild, they had their vulnerabilities, and over time, the tribes learned to exploit these weaknesses. While their small size gave them certain advantages in speed and stealth, it also made them more vulnerable in direct combat. When forced into an open confrontation, especially when they were outnumbered, the Teiheehan could be overpowered by larger and stronger warriors. The most potent weapon against the Teiheehan was fire. They had a deep and almost instinctive fear of flames, which the tribes quickly recognized. The sight of a large bonfire or torch would often cause the Teiheehan to retreat, as though the very light itself repelled them. Fire was used to drive them from their hiding places, forcing them out into the open where they lost their ability to ambush. Some believed that the creature's leathery skin was particularly susceptible to burning, which would explain their aversion to flame. The tribes began to fortify their villages with fire at night, placing large bonfires around their perimeters to keep the Teiheehan at bay. Another key weakness of the Teiheehan was their reliance on stealth. They were most dangerous when they could move unseen, by using the shadows of the plains to conceal their approach, or by turning completely invisible. In situations where they lost this advantage, such as in broad daylight or in areas with fewer places to hide, the Teiheehan were far less effective. The tribes realized that engaging the Teiheehan in open spaces, where they could not use the terrain to their advantage, gave them a fighting chance. Additionally, the Teiheehan were said to be repelled by certain spiritual objects. Shamans and medicine men crafted talismans and protective charms imbued with spiritual power, which were believed to keep the creatures at a distance. These items were often placed around villages or worn by warriors as a form of protection. Some stories claimed that the Teiheehan could sense the spiritual energy of these objects and were afraid to come too close, as though they could feel the power of the spirits working against them. In some variations of their folklore, the Teiheehan were believed to have kept their hearts outside of their bodies, making them even more difficult to defeat. This unique trait meant that they could survive even grievous wounds as long as their hearts were intact and hidden away. To kill a Teiheehan, one would need to find and destroy the hidden heart, which could be concealed in remote, secret places, far from where the creature roamed or fought. Despite these weaknesses, the Teiheehan were quick learners. Over time, they adapted their strategies, finding ways to strike even in well-defended villages. Their intelligence made them difficult to outwit for long, but their fear of fire and the limits of their stealth remained key factors that the tribes used to defend themselves. Still, the threat of the Teiheehan was ever present, and even with these vulnerabilities, no one could ever fully predict when or where they would strike next. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. The attacks of the Teiheehan were swift, brutal, and left a lasting mark on the tribes of the Great Plains. These raids were not just acts of violence, but orchestrated campaigns of terror. The Teiheehan thrived on their ability to strike suddenly, often in the dead of night when their prey was most vulnerable. Villagers would be jolted awake by the sound of chaos, the unmistakable sounds of battle, followed by screams, and then a chilling silence as the Teiheehan vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Their tactics were based on speed and surprise. They favored small, isolated villages where defenses were weak and the population was sparse. They attacked in groups, using their small size and agility to overwhelm their victims before they could mount a defense. In these moments, the Teiheehan would seem like a swarm, darting between tents and huts, cutting down anyone who stood in their way. Their goal was not just to kill, but to terrify, and they often left behind grisly scenes as a warning to others. The aftermath of these attacks was horrific. Bodies were often found torn apart, some half consumed, as the Teiheehan were notorious for their cannibalistic tendencies. The few survivors of such raids were often traumatized, speaking in whispered, broken tones about the small figures that had descended upon them, moving with terrifying speed and ferocity. Some were left alive only to spread fear, a deliberate tactic of the Teiheehan to ensure that their reputation grew with each attack. There was no pattern to the raids, which made the Teiheehan all the more dangerous. One season, a village could remain untouched, while another nearby would be decimated without warning. This randomness added to the fear, as no one knew when or where the Teiheehan might strike next. Even those who took precautions were not immune, as the Teiheehan adapted to new defenses with cunning and malice. The Teiheehan were not content with simple raids. They also laid traps for traveling warriors and hunters. They would lure people into the wilderness where they would be ambushed. Their ability to deceive, to sound like a lost child or a wounded comrade, made them all the more terrifying. Many warriors would hear what they thought was a familiar voice, only to find themselves surrounded by the Teiheehan in the dark, far from help. Some individuals would be captured by the Teiheehan and taken back to their cave, where they were kept prisoner, awaiting to be eaten. This is actually how the Arapaho people discovered that the Teiheehan kept their hearts outside their bodies. In one tale, while a man was kept prisoner, he noticed many organ-like objects hanging in the cave. After a few days, the man realized that the Teiheehan would inspect the organs, but never consume them. They also didn't appear to be decomposing. The man deduced that these organs were important to them. After some time and sheer luck, the man escaped from his restraints. But before leaving, He stabbed each and every organ he saw hanging in the cave. In that moment, he heard the many cries of the dwarves and then silence. Only after escaping did he realize that those organs were in fact the Teiheehan's hearts. The tribe soon realized that they were dealing with more than just physical enemies. The psychological toll of living under the constant threat of attack was immense. The fear of the Teiheehan seeped into every aspect of life, with villages fortifying their homes and organizing patrols. But the small cannibals always found a way to strike. The fear was not just of death, but of being hunted, stalked, and devoured by creatures that seemed to know no mercy. After years of enduring the brutal raids, the tribes came to the grim realization that they could not wait for the Teiheehan to disappear on their own. The small, deadly creatures showed no signs of relenting, and their attacks were growing bolder. In response, the tribes banded together, determined to eliminate this threat once and for all. They organized war parties, bands of their strongest and most skilled warriors, tasked with hunting down the Teiheehan and destroying their lairs. The task, however, was far from simple. The Teiheehan were masters of the land, knowing every nook and cranny of the plains, from hidden caves to dense forests. They used this knowledge to evade capture, retreating into hard-to-reach places whenever they were pursued. Many warriors sent to hunt them never returned, and those who did came back with stories of terrifying encounters. Battles with the Teiheehan were unlike any other. The creatures fought with an animalistic ferocity, using the terrain to their advantage and launching ambushes from unexpected angles. What made the war against the Teihiihan even more challenging was their ability to blend into the wilderness. They left few traces behind, and it was nearly impossible to track them for long. Some war parties would follow signs of a recent attack, broken branches, disturbed earth, or the remains of their victims, only for the trail to vanish abruptly. The Teiheehan knew how to cover their tracks, and they often used decoys or false trails to mislead their pursuers. Despite the difficulties, the tribes refused to give up. They began to change their strategy, focusing less on chasing the Teiheehan across the plains and more on destroying their homes. Guided by the wisdom of their shamans and elders, the warriors sought out the places where the Teiheehan were believed to dwell: remote caves, dense thickets, and deep ravines. These lairs were well hidden, but the tribes were relentless in their search. Once found, the warriors would set fires to flush out or kill the Teiheehan, collapsing cave entrances or using smoke to drive them out of their hiding places. The battles that ensued were fierce. When cornered, the Teiheehan fought with even greater ferocity, knowing that they had nowhere to run. They used every trick in their arsenal, from ambushes to traps, and many warriors fell in the struggle. But slowly the tide began to turn. The tribes grew more skilled at anticipating the Teiheehan's movements, and with each lair destroyed, the creature's numbers dwindled. The war was long and costly, but it was a necessary fight for survival. The Teiheehan were not easily defeated, and their cunning and brutality left a lasting scar on the people of the plains. The long and bloody conflict between the tribes and the Teiheehan slowly came to an end as the attacks began to dwindle. After years of relentless warfare, the Teiheehan seemed to disappear, retreating into the shadows from which they had once emerged. Their raids, which had once been a constant terror, became less frequent until they stopped altogether. But the disappearance of the Teiheehan was not marked by a decisive victory, nor was there any one battle that the tribes could point to as the final defeat of the little cannibals. Theories about their sudden withdrawal varied. Some believed that the tribes had been successful in driving the Teiheehan to extinction, that the relentless pursuit of their lairs had wiped out their numbers. Others suggested that the Teiheehan, ever cunning and elusive, had simply retreated to more remote regions, far from the reach of human civilization. It was said that they could be hiding in deep caves, far beyond the plains, waiting for the right moment to return. The disappearance of the Teiheehan was met with a mix of relief and unease. While the immediate threat had passed, the tribes were left wondering if the little cannibals had truly been defeated, or if they were simply waiting in the dark. Some warriors who had hunted them spoke of strange encounters even after the raids had ceased. Sightings of shadowy figures at the edge of the forest, the feeling of being watched while out hunting alone. These stories fueled the belief that the Teiheehan were not gone, only hiding. Some elders warned that the Teiheehan had not been defeated, merely driven underground, and that they would return when the time was right. They reminded the people that the Teiheehan had survived for centuries, long before the tribes had settled the plains, and that they were unlikely to be eradicated so easily. Their very nature, tied to the darker aspects of the land and the spirits, suggested that they would never truly be gone. Despite these warnings, the memory of the Teiheehan slowly began to fade from daily life. The younger generations grew up without ever seeing the creatures, and over time, the stories of the Teiheehan took on a more mythical quality. They were spoken of less as a real threat and more as a cautionary tale, a story to be told around the fire to warn children of the dangers of wandering too far from the safety of the village. Yet, even as the Teiheehan disappeared from the physical world, their legacy remained. The tribes knew that the plains held many secrets, and that the world was filled with forces beyond their understanding. The Teiheehan may have vanished, but the fear they inspired lingered, a reminder that there were always dangers lurking in the unknown. The legacy of the Teiheehan was not simply one of blood and terror, but of a profound and lasting fear that shaped the culture and beliefs of the tribes of the Great Plains. Even after the little cannibals disappeared from the land, their stories remained alive, passed down through generations as both warning and wisdom. The Teiheehan became symbols of the unknown dangers that lurked beyond the boundaries of human understanding, a reminder that not all threats came from rival tribes or wild animals. In the years that followed their disappearance, the tribes continued to speak of the Teiheehan in hushed tones, particularly when the winds howled across the plains or when the night grew too still. Elders would remind the younger generations of the dark days when the Teiheehan had terrorized their people, using these stories to teach important lessons about respect for the land, the spirits, and the balance of nature. The Teiheehan in this way became more than just a physical threat. They were a metaphor for the consequences of living out of harmony with the world around them. Parents would tell their children the stories of the Teiheehan to instill caution and respect for the wild. Warriors, too, were reminded to stay vigilant, even in times of peace, as the threat of the little cannibals could never be completely forgotten. Though the raids had stopped, the fear of the unknown still gripped the hearts of many. Over time, the Teiheehan became a part of the spiritual fabric of the tribes. Shamans and spiritual leaders spoke of them not just as creatures of flesh and bone, but as representations of the darker forces in the world, forces that could be unleashed if balance was not maintained. The Teiheehan were seen as the consequences of unchecked violence, greed, and disrespect for the natural order, a warning that the spirits of the land were always watching. In this way, the story of the Teiheehan transcended its origins as a tale of monsters and became a moral and spiritual lesson. The people of the plains came to understand that the real threat of the Teiheehan was not just their physical attacks, but the imbalance they represented. The fear of the little cannibals became a symbol of the larger fear of living out of harmony with the world, a fear that, in many ways, was more powerful and enduring than the creatures themselves. Even today, the legend of the Teiheehan persists in the oral traditions of the Great Plains tribes. Though no one has seen the little cannibals in generations, their story continues to be told, a haunting reminder of the unknown forces that still roam the land. Whether real or myth, the Teiheehan have left an indelible mark on the history and culture of the plains, ensuring that their legacy of fear will never be forgotten.